Hello everyone, thank you so much for watching today. I'm here to talk about the lineage of my home in Vienna, Virginia for this Ancestry capstone project. The prompt is, why do you care, or why do we care about ancestry? To extend that to this topic, I ask, why should you care about this property? The answer is you shouldn't. There's no reason to care about small property out in Virginia. There's hundreds of thousands of acres of land in the US. Everybody has their home and their origin. However, you should care about yourself, and you should care about how you identify and the parts of yourself that you value, and ultimately how that impacts your perception of the world around you, and how that impacts the relationships you're able to form with friends, colleagues, mentors, and future relationships that'll carry you throughout your life. After taking this class, I really believe that the purpose of Ancestry ultimately is to better interact with the world around you and become a better person in the process. We spend so much time documenting our family and learning from stories and experiences and experiencing our own stories and interactions, only to have it inform the way in which we connect with others and the world around us. The more we're able to understand our past, the more we're able to engage with people authentically. In that same vein, this property and this home and this lineage is one of the ways in which I connect with the world around me. So I'd love to share a bit about that so that maybe you can take a look at how you view your ancestry and do the same sort of analysis. I want to start off by talking about my family ancestry. My family is relatively small and well documented. There aren't a lot of exciting stories. There really isn't a lot that falls outside of the norm in terms of my demographic and quality of life and social standing and economics and things like that. So I have a very normal, very standard family ancestry. However, I've always liked to think about ancestry in a way that makes me unique and makes my perspective unique. And there's another side to my ancestry. There's a genetic side. And perhaps interestingly, the genetic side is anything but normal or expected. I received from my parents a genetic inheritance of a fairly serious chronic medical condition. They were both recessive carriers. Their grandparents and their parents had the gene, defective gene. And because they were both recessive carriers, the disease manifested itself in me. As a result, my childhood was very unique. I grew up with a fairly isolating medical condition, and I realized that I had to grow up and become very mature at a very early age. There was a time where my parents were very worried by this. They were very worried that I would take this genetic inheritance and I would look towards that as my sense of ancestry. And ultimately, as I've said, as my sense of how I'm connecting with the world around me and how I'm choosing my interactions. However, I was very fortunate that I didn't choose to take this ancestry and see it as the only way I could interact with the world and become a better person. I actually didn't focus on that inheritance. I didn't think of that genetic ancestry as a valid ancestry for me. At the same time, I didn't really focus on my family ancestry because it wasn't super significant or interesting. I looked towards something else. Ultimately, I looked towards my home and my environment as my ancestry. And that sounds strange, but I'll explain why, and I'll explain why it's important. Growing up as a child, I had the serious medical side, but I was also very fortunate to grow up in a very idyllic, kind of American setting. I had a very unique but archetypical American boy childhood. A lot of neighbors in a small cul-de-sac, a very nice suburban town with a very small town feel. I would spend the summers where I could outside playing in go-karts and in the creek with pellet guns and in sports and kick the can, and all these very traditional kind of American boy experiences. And I realized that in those experiences, in those times where I could be outside playing with others and engaging and socializing as a normal kid, I wasn't the sick kid that was just trying to grow up, but the sick kid that was trying to go through such and such medical procedure. It was very liberating in that it gave me the ability to actually be a kid. And that was very important to me, because I realized I have this side of me that's very admirable and very undesirable, but it wasn't defining who I was, and it wasn't defining how I could choose to interact with the world around me. So I chose this built environment as my ancestry and also my inheritance. I'm inheriting a home in a physical sense, but also the experiences that go along with that. I'm inheriting that from my parents, and ultimately from past generations who have owned the property, if you think about it in a very kind of structured and linear timeline. And so for the purposes of this project, I really wanted to look at, well, what is the history of this inheritance? What happens when you look back beyond my family? How is this piece of land, this property, changed over the past, in this case, 400 years, and who have been the people that have, number one, shaped it, and number two, been shaped by it? And so that became something that was very important to me, because it was such an integral part of my identity and how I view myself as a normal person. How did it get to be this way? And so that's really the focus of this project, and the bulk of the slides are, how did this property change over time? What is this property's ancestry? And then how did that play into this property as my inheritance, if you will? And ultimately taking that inheritance, thinking of that ancestry and using it to inform a perspective, in this case feeling like a normal kid, and also using it to better interact with the world around me and understand that I can be treated normally, and I can go out and play with kids my own age and go to college and do all these incredible things that my parents didn't quite imagine me doing when I was younger. And so one of the big questions then becomes for me is, well, how do you look at this property and understand how others have been shaped by it, and how did it change over time? Unfortunately, I can't provide answers there. Those are very esoteric, specific questions that there simply aren't answers for. However, it gives me some peace knowing that others were affected by the property, even if they didn't recognize it at the time. I sit in the summer and I'll sit in the same creek, and I'll look back and I'll think, number one, so much has changed doing this project to really inform that perspective. Over 400 years, of course, a significant amount of development, houses, paved roads, electricity, trees, things like that, foliage. But number two, so little has changed. There's so much where I look around at rock formations and things you'll see in the pictures to come, where they've stayed the same. And for 400 years, those have stayed the same. And so in a sense, that knowing that and understanding that through this project connects me to the past landowners and to everybody else that's been associated with this inheritance, almost like a family tree in a less traditional sense. Ultimately, these are the experiences that define my sense of self, and it's a way for me to explore a kind of ancestry that really gives me a positive identity and a positive way to express myself and interact with the world. Because like I said, ultimately I think that's the reason why we should care about ancestry, is because it is informing a perspective of ourselves, and that perspective is allowing us to go out and communicate with the world and be the best we can be. That being said, I want to get into the actual meat and bones of the property and talk a little bit about the things that I see and that are very valuable to me. So, Visualizing lineage, ownership of Vienna, Virginia property 2319 Tangleville Drive. This is tax code section 38.3 for those keeping score at home. So the beginning, this is 1649. It's unincorporated land in Northern Virginia. At this point, it was received as a political gift to Lord Fairfax of Cameron after the English Civil War. The idea was this land could be colonized, used for the export of commodities, tobacco, things like that. It wasn't until 1764 that the land was actually subdivided and you had a new owner coming in, Richard Henry Lee II. This is, of course, the same Lee that's part of the very famous Virginia Lee family, Robert E. Lee and so forth. And so already you have an ancestry of a property interacting with a number of other different ancestries, a family ancestry from Lee, and even beyond the family ancestry, you have it interacting with an ancestry of human origins, if you will. You look back to 1649 and you think, you have indigenous groups that are living on this land, and they've evolved for thousands of years to reach this point, and all that's unrecorded, and it's not something you're going to find. But when you look at this and you look at the history, the land did exist, and you go back a couple million years, the land still exists in the same position, and that's one of the things that kind of gets me going in my brain. So 1764, very exciting. 1844, you have James Ronk purchasing and controlling 100 acres of zoned farmland southwest of Route 637, which doesn't exist today. It's Route 66 and then I-95 and 495. And you have his grave there on the side. And you can see I've marked, I didn't make this apparent, but you can see I've marked in blue the different locations of the home. And Virginia was all farmland still. And it remained until quite recently, actually. So 1957, you see the land change ownership again. Residential developer Mill Peterson engaged in a real estate deal with Till Hazel to develop the first housing tract off of Mill Road. This was really the first of its kind in Northern Virginia, in Vienna, Virginia, and a huge risk on the part of the developer. They received a number of tax incentives and grants for this development, and there was a lot that went into deciding, okay, where they're actually going to zone the property. And you can see here, they're getting pretty apparent. You can see here that you have the original deed and Board of Zoning Appeals licensing. So huge risk, and it's one of those things where I think, well, what if they hadn't zoned it in such a way? How would that have impacted me? These guys are related to the land just as I am. They surveyed it and walked the same kind of creeks and grounds that I did in a different time, and that connects me to them. Also, from a career standpoint, I'm interested in similar things to what they were doing. So it's fascinating to kind of get that perspective and see the impact that they had, and look at that ancestry and project it onto my life and say, well, without sounding ridiculous, 30 years from now, could I be having that same impact on somebody else if I'm engaging in these development projects? So that's something personally that intrigued me and meant a lot to me, because it's connecting me to this kind of past, and again, connecting me to the past and projecting to the future. In 1969, they zoned the land for residential development, and Hazel Land Companies began developing. And they actually had paved Tangleville at that point, which is my street. And this is not too long ago. This is 60 years at this point. And you can see too, that is the property of my home, Metro Tangleville. So the first house sold in 1976 to an FBI employee, W. Walter Richardson. Superficial, of course, but we're talking about lineages and ancestry, and the way in which this property's lineage connects me to other ancestries. Walter is also my name, which is kind of funny to see, because it's not super common.
you can see the first picture of the home that's available on record from 1976. Surprisingly the same as it is now. The interior is different, but the exterior is the same. And so, these two guys, Walter Richardson and Donald Parker, they had, at least superficially, very similar experiences. They went through the same doors, drove up the same driveway, entered the same garage as me. And while that's superficial, maybe doesn't have a whole lot of meaning outside of the novelty, it is interesting to think our lives were very similar from a utility perspective. We dealt with the same environments. Of course, now in 2001, the house was sold for the third time to Walter Witt. This is my dad in this case. And the original interior and the land improvements were intact. So same kind of picture, same pillars you can see, same tree dying at this point, and then the same 1969 interior. So like I said, very same environment, sharing the same experiences, and having these kind of commonalities in a lineage. Ultimately, in 2016, this is my dad, Walter Witt, same as me, same name, contracted to redevelop the interior, but leave the exterior the same. And so you'll see it's totally different now. That was in 2016. And you'll also note the map really hasn't changed since it was zoned and developed. And that's kind of what I talk about, where you have so much that's changed, but you also have so much that stayed the same, and so many shared experiences from there. And so I look at this, and I look at the past, I look at these past maps, and I think, the environment that I grew up in has remained pretty constant. And when I go back, it's something that ultimately connects me back to the past, and is a great source of strength and reflection, thinking back, this is where I've come from, this is the environment that's shaped me. Acknowledging that and saying that is a lot of what Ancestry means to me, and is something that I draw a lot of strength from. And then finally, the work side and special thanks to some of the people in the Virginia room, the Fairfax County Courthouse Archives and Zoning Administration. They all helped greatly with this. It wasn't easy to find. So that brings me back to where I started. I asked, why should you care? And the answer was, well, you shouldn't care about this property. But you should care about ancestry, and I would say you should care about it outside of simply genetics or simply family trees. To me, the ancestry is so important because it's the part of you that defines who you are, and I've said this numerous times, how you connect with the world around you. Figuring out what makes you you and what you genuinely get excited about, and what you use to characterize yourself is so important, especially in understanding how you're going to interact with the world. I would say take that, figure out what that is, and explore the lineage of that, whether it's a job, an industry, an environment you grew up in, even a family member, a toy at home, something like that. Take that and explore the lineage of it. Figure out how it's changed over time, how it came to become yours to inherit. And I can't promise you'll come up with answers. I can't promise anything intangible because, quite frankly, I don't think I've come up with anything intangible or tangible about myself. But you might be surprised at what you find. I think ultimately that is why we're studying ancestry, because we don't know what we'll find and we don't know how it'll impact us. Ultimately, the hope is that impact is positive. And I can say without a doubt, in this case, better understanding my environment and exploring that lineage has definitely left a positive impression on me and my life. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. That's all.